Okay, we are live. This is Alex Bush, chairman of the Montgomery County Republican Party. With me is Delegate Robin Grammer from Baltimore County, and we are being translated by Colleen. Thanks for joining us.
Hey,
Delegate, why don't you, there's so much to ask you about. There was so much craziness at the last minute in the session, and then we had, I guess, as bigger news that I don't want the Democrats to get away with all the things they did. So why don't you just walk us through, introduce yourself to us, and just walk us through the madness that happened.
Absolutely. So my name is Robin Grammer. I'm a Republican representing Legislative District 6 at southeastern Baltimore County, Dundalk, Edgemere, Essex, Fort Howard, Middle River, Rosedale. So I'll jump right into the end of session, and you can stop me wherever you like. So a session was progressing. Of course, we're working on 1,000 different issues, and everything's going as normal, but we start to hear the news about coronavirus and how it's becoming a bigger public health risk than a lot of people anticipated. We start seeing the news about other countries. It's really escalating there. So it was on everybody's radar fairly early. At one point in the session, we were pulled into a meeting in the caucus, Republican caucus, and they said, look, this is really starting to become a bigger issue here locally, both in Maryland and across our country. And we suspect that there's going to be a lot of actions taken in the intermediate future.
So first quick interruption, was this meeting before or after the China travel ban? Just so we can get our bearings.
You know, I'm not exact. I'm sorry, but I don't know. I couldn't give you the dates. In a session, everything blurs together down there. So from that point on in session, things got progressively stranger. Eventually, the public, shortly after that, a couple days after that, the public was sent home. They said, we can't, it's going to be sponsor-only testimony on bills, and we cannot have the public in the complex. After that, our staff was sent home. After that, lobbyists and advocates were banned from entering the complex. Protests were prohibited. And it became like, if you've ever been to Annapolis, Annapolis is people. That's what Annapolis is. It's people sponsoring bills. It's people testifying on bills. It's people saying this is a good bill, this is a bad bill. The whole complex is filled with people. It became an absolute ghost town in Annapolis. It would be lawmakers in committee, and you typically have a room full of people that are for it, against it, and it's just you, and you're passing bills, you're voting on bills.
I mean, often you could have people doing testimony till 2 a.m.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
last session we broke records. The gun day last year, we broke a record. I think we went until 4 a.m. on gun bill day. But you start to get a very eerie feeling, like it's literally just us. Like you're just the ruling class, and you're doing whatever you look. There's an organic, there is actually an organic method to the madness of people being down there and pressuring people and advocating and saying this is wrong, this is good. That actually does matter. When it's just you, just the lawmakers, I mean, you're doing it. How are you supposed to have transparency when the public has absolutely no physical access?
And there was the live streams weren't always up either, as I remember.
So what a lot of other lawmakers said, I guess the Democrats said, they said, look, the streams are up, and they would hold up their computer and they would say, look, here's the stream. But, I come from IT, and you know that in IT, it's much easier to get to a feed when you're on the network than when you're off the network. So, I'd be sitting on the floor of the house and my phone is blowing up and people are saying, I can't get to the live stream. Well, that's because they're outside of the network. And nobody could access the live stream outside of Annapolis. So you're voting on bills. Bill lists are being moved forward. And usually when a vote list is put out, like everybody in Annapolis is like, can I have a copy of the vote? Can I have a copy of the vote? Because they want to see what's going on. Nobody's there to even ask. The website is updated, the next day or the day after. So the public access to Annapolis is well after the fact.
Was there ever any discussion of allowing either live video or phone or pre-taped video comments from the public on anything? Was there even a discussion of that?
Not really. I mean, the testimony was the first thing that went. When they banished the public from the complex, it was sponsor-only testimony. When they say sponsor-only, it means you don't get a panel, you don't get supporters, and there's no opposition. So they could submit a letter if they like, but that was it. So from that point, there was essentially just lawmakers and like really essential staff. That was the only people that were left in Annapolis. And what you started to hear was, people are saying we might actually go home early. We might end session early. Well, that chatter started, and then you started hearing it from other people. It was all rumor and speculation. But the word on the street, if there's that much buzz, someone is talking about it somewhere. And at one point, the speaker's staff came in to the Republican caucus. We had a Republican caucus meeting. And of course, the Republicans are up in arms. We're saying, if the coronavirus is this bad, why are we here? Because what we do is we go in rooms full of people and we sit next to them. So by just being here, you're at risk of exposure. And then you go into the full house and it's 141 lawmakers plus 10 or 15 staff and other employees. So if this is this bad, we should just pass the budget and go home. That was the opinion. And it was a little bit ruckus. And then Alex Hughes from the speaker's staff comes in. And I like Alex. She's great. She's very fair to me. And, they kind of waffled a little bit. And I stood up and I said, look, Alex, before you came in, there was some real partisan angst about what's going to happen here. Because, let's be clear, we don't have the numbers to stop anything. We have no public access to Annapolis. Nobody's here. Nobody knows what we're doing. There are people that are struggling to see what's going on via the internet and the video systems. And she said, look, I've seen the bill lists, the Republican bills there. There's not going to be any hanky panky. And I said, okay, I feel a little bit weird, but I mean, I don't have control over the schedule of the session. You know what I mean? The best I could do is just walk out. But constitutionally, you're supposed to be there. Like if they wanted to, they could send the state police to come retrieve you and bring you to session. And that's where things kind of went sideways. So I actually had a lot of bills alive at this point. I had 3 that were passed over to the Senate. I had 1 that I was working on with Senator Sidnor, and they were both alive. And Environment and Transportation was telling me they were both alive. And we're like, they were saying at this point, like, we're probably going to shut down 7 or 8 days from now. And I was like, okay. And I had 3 which I felt still had some life in them. So I was in a really good position. All of my bills failed. One of them, like a staffer, screwed up a bill number, and they said there was an affirmative vote on someone else's bill. So that bill failed. Another Environment and Health and Education in the Senate, Senator Pinsky's wife had passed. So he was out of Annapolis. So they were understaffed, and someone just said, look, we don't have the throughput to do it. So all kind of like wonky things started happening just because we were on a time crunch and things were just going sideways. So what did they pass? I mean, they passed a lot of menial things, which nobody, weren't controversial at all. But that's when you started to see the tax increases come in. So there were some really huge tax increase bills this session. A lot of them they reeled back. But they ended up passing several tax increases. One was be known as the Disney tax, where they taxed all the streaming services, because they have they're not making their budgetary numbers. They haven't for several years. We're operating, we're not meeting what's mandated in the budget. You have Kerwin, which is, over 30 billion in the next 10 years. They have no way to pay for that. So they're really looking for ways to generate new funding sources. So they ended up taxing streaming services. They ended up increasing the tax on smoking products, and they ended up taxing digital services, digital ad delivery. I'm sorry. So like if you have like Facebook or Google ads, they're going to tax that. So I mean, it was unbelievable to see that happen. The most among the most egregious of bills was, I think it was Senate Bill 1028, and that's the bill. It's a constitutional amendment. The history of Maryland, the budgetary history of Maryland is this. The legislature has a history of bankrupting the state. So at some point they came up with a mechanism that gives most of the budgetary authority to the office of the governor. And the purpose of that is that the governor has a statewide purview, and he's going to, as opposed to the historical application of the budget process, where people were just putting things into the budget to get themselves reelected, the governor is going to have a more statewide view on things, a view that's going to serve all the jurisdictions and all the parts of the state, and it's going to be good for the health of the state. That's why Maryland has the budgetary framework that it does.
I think it was in was it like 1910s or something that the legislature bankrupted the state. Yeah. And I remember looking into this when I first heard it, and the legislature just rolled over and consented to this change, as I understand. Like they kind of like admitted, yeah, we're really bad at this. Maybe we shouldn't do it.
Yeah, that's it. I don't know all the details about the history, but it wouldn't surprise me if you were the legislature and you bankrupted the state and someone said, here's what you do to fix it. It's probably a good idea. So the legislative process is this. It's a bicameral body, means you have two bodies. You have the House and the Senate. To get a bill passed, you have to read a bill 3 times over 3 days in each chamber. So you have to have first, second, third reading in House, first, second, third reading in the Senate. That's to give the public 6 days of access on any action. It's usually a more long process where the public has really plenty of time to see what's going on, plenty of time to comment, time to testify if you like, time to give feedback to your lawmakers. That's the purpose of it, openness and transparency. So they had this bill, Senate Bill 1028, it's a constitutional amendment, and what it does is it gives the legislature ability to increase funding in the budget. And that's something they haven't had in over 100 years. That's the short of it. So I believe it was either a Thursday night or a Friday night. It was just zipped through the Senate. It's because they can, if they like, they can suspend the rules. So they did it late one night, and early the next morning, in about 4 hours, the bill had passed 3 days, 3 calendar days in the House. 4 hours. It had passed three calendar days in 4 hours. It came to appropriations. Delegate Valentino Smith, who is a Democrat, she's a member of Appropriations. She was so worked up about it, she got up and walked out of Appropriations. It gets to the floor, and she stands up and she speaks against it. And it's all about process and openness and transparency. And the second we walked off the floor, they stripped her of her leadership authority. So she called the Democrats out openly, and she got punished for it instantly. And I posted my video online, and they weren't happy about it. But I mean, what are you going to do? But it's things like this, like literally in government, you could do with whatever you can get away with. And unless people hold you accountable, that's the state of the union. I knew things were going to happen when they ban protest. Because look, as a lawmaker, how do you even contemplate that? Regardless of what the scenario is, how can you contemplate saying you can't come here to resist what I'm doing? I mean, it's just egregious. And if something was that bad that we ever needed to take that action to like strike the public from the complex, you need to just wrap it up. Just get the 3 or 4 bills done that are really, really important and wrap it up.
Well, I mean, in my experience, we always organize resistance to a bill around testimony. It's always, this is when you can come to testify. If you want, email in advance, this is where it needs to go, but it needs to go by this date. So everything, all the planning and organizing is around the hearings.
Yeah.
And when you don't have hearings and you have it all happen so fast,
right.
I mean, there is no reason, there is no way to resist it.
Yeah, that's the shame of it. That's the shame of it. And I give people leadway because of the nature of this problem. And COVID-19, it's a real thing. It's serious. It's hurting and killing people, and we should take it seriously. But when you're in a position of authority, you have to act responsibly with the circumstances you're given. And I stood up on the floor and I called it tyranny, and I think it is tyranny. In that, so in a bill you have codified language and you have uncodified language. Codified language is going into statute. Uncodified language frequently speaks to how the law shall be followed, applied, etc. And it
takes effect, that kind of thing.
Exactly. In the uncodified language, it actually specifies how the language will be on the ballot referendum. And generally, it is this: for the purpose of having a balanced budget. That's the wording that you're going to vote on in November, or whenever you're going to vote on it. People are going to read that and they're going to say, well, I want a balanced budget, and they're going to vote for that, not knowing what it really does is it steals the authority from the office of the governor.
That's what they did. What was it? Last time they did the redistricting, where when it was up for public vote on whether they would go with the map drawn by the Democrats, the way they phrased the question was basically, there's a new census. The Constitution requires us to have a new map. Do you want to comply with the Constitution? And it wasn't like, that's not the question. The question was, if you want this map, not whether you want to comply with the Constitution. It's like, just here. It's not, this doesn't compel a balanced budget. It just gives the legislature the power to not have a balanced budget if they choose.
That's right. That's right. Look, we're seeing all kind of things, especially with the COVID-19 issue, that are really egregious. But what it comes down to is like, what's the old saying? You get the government you deserve. I can't, it's on the tip of my tongue, but I can't recite it. It's just going to come to me in 5 minutes. But if you're not paying attention to your government, if you're not like, if being vigilant about understanding and holding people to account about what they're doing, you get what you're served. And, we have this situation in Congress with the CARES Act. In retrospect, what happened is, for a lot of this funding, it was supposed to go to small businesses. And in practice, a lot of these small businesses applied for it the day that it was enacted. They never got it. They never got processed because the program was oversubscribed. And what we found is a lot of the banks that were giving the funding out, they were giving it to businesses that were preferential to that bank. A lot of these preferential businesses were big companies like Ruth Chris. And what leaders are saying is, well, it was a loophole. If you believe that was a loophole, you're a fool. Those people knew exactly what they did. They put it into the bill purposefully, and they passed it. Nobody read it, and they passed it without a vote.
Well, there isn't either way. It's pretty bad. Either they gave private institutions the ability to dole out public dollars basically however they saw fit, with biased criteria, and they either had no idea that could happen, they have no understanding of human nature, or they knew it would happen, which I agree is significantly worse, but either way, it's really bad.
Yeah, look, if you follow government, you know that the government and banks, that they work hand in hand, because that is the fractional reserve system. That is the system we have. So it doesn't surprise me that the members of Congress, whomever drafted that bill, and you'll never know who drafted that bill, it doesn't surprise me that banks were given authority to do with what they chose, whatever they chose to do. You'll never know who got preferential treatment or who got that first call. In Maryland, we passed legislation this session to give the similar programs out. The first thing I did when I left Annapolis was I came home and I compiled a list of different resources for people, both unemployed, average folks, small businesses, people who were going to be hurt by this. Before I could even send it to the list of constituents that I have in my district, one of the programs was oversubscribed.
Like, how long was that?
How does it was days? Like, how does that happen? And look, you're never going to get access to that information. But that's how this thing works. It's super shady. They're going to do it again. And everybody should really be concerned, and everybody should be paying attention, because right now with this COVID-19 situation, what we're doing to remediate this, is it getting dark in here? I just realized how dark it is. Am I okay? Can you see me?
I can see you.
Okay. So, I mean, there's a lot of spending, and there's two mechanisms they're using to deal with this. One, the borrowing, and two is quantitative easing. And you can only do this for so long. The piper's going to come to collect here, and look, we're going to get at the point where the paying down of the borrowing is going to become the biggest line item in the budget, the federal budget. State, local revenues when the economy dips like this, the revenues of jurisdictions like Montgomery County or Baltimore County, they're going way down. Like, all the jurisdictions are already in the hole. The state of Maryland, the revenue write-downs are going to be massive. So the states and the localities are going to be underwater. They're going to be, I bet my bottom dollar, you're going to see more and more of states and local jurisdictions saying, we need more assistance from the federal government. So we've already spent $2.5 trillion. We don't talk in millions or billions anymore. We talk in trillions. They're doing it again. The Federal Reserve has announced $2.5 trillion in quantitative easing. So, I mean, and the unemployment is at the highest it's been in 30 years. And the stock market is going up. However that works.
Because there's still just a lot of money to get a hold of before,
it reminds me a lot of the housing bubble. So there's only, the stock market is supposed to reflect gains in value and supposedly real wealth. Well, nothing of what you're seeing right now is real. And a lot of people, are being sustained by these programs. And at this point, it's like average people are sustained by these programs that are allowing them to work from home, or a lot of people are actually being paid to not work right now. And I'm not going to pass judgment because of the nature of the situation, but being sustained by this is not a long-term viable option. So we're going to see what happens with this next round of whatever action Congress takes.
So speaking of budgets and spending money you don't have, let's talk about Kerwin.
Okay.
What the heck was with that?
Okay, so let me explain the politics as I see it. So there have been a lot of things that have changed regarding education in the last 20 years. Education has changed, and the idea is that you hit me with a question I wasn't necessarily ready to answer. The idea generally that I've seen from education is that we can't let students fail and we can't let students fall through the cracks. And that's a great idea, and I love it. And I love the idea of providing students whatever support they need individually to get through the system. But that general idea is being pressed on teachers and administrators 10 different ways. And in the end of the day, it's a disservice to the student, it's a disservice to parents, and it's a disservice to teachers. Because what they ultimately have to do is lower the bar, whether it's academically, whether it's grades, whether it's attendance, whether it's discipline. And the thing is that nobody's going to reel this back in. This discipline issue in Baltimore County is completely out of control.
And just, I mean, I followed the news closer when I lived up there, but just to clarify to a lot of people, that's not like we're talking about like kids throwing spitballs. This is like people being beaten half to death by kids waiting at a bus stop or something.
Yeah.
This is very serious.
I'll give you an example. Like when the teachers union folks came to lobby me and they said, we're here to talk to you about Kerwin. And one of the people I knew and one I didn't, one was a teacher and one was a retired teacher. And they, I said, well, talk to me about what you got. And we talked about what they thought would be in the bill. And I said this, I said, look, first off, the bill's not even passed out of committee. So I can't give you a straight answer because I don't even know what's in the bill yet. But second, I'm really reluctant to vote for a bill that's going to have massive spending increases, but doesn't actually do anything to remediate a lot of the problems that we see in schools. And the discipline issue is so terribly bad for students, parents, and teachers that it's in a lot of places, it's just totally consuming the classroom. And I recited a lot of the examples that I have reported to me from parents in my district. A lot of them are like sexual offenses. We had the situation in Parkville High School where, we heard it was one rape, and then it was this student who had raped and been readmitted to rape again. And now it's 5 girls. Yeah, 5 different cases. And I talked to them and I told them examples in my district. And then these people here that were there to lobby me on Kerwin started to tell me their examples. And the person who was still a teacher, he said, I know a substitute, and the substitute went into a school and the substitute was recently told this. They said, you cannot wear ties or lanyards because the children will use them to choke you. It was an elementary school. So it's that bad, but you have to have a change up here. The legislature has to change up here. And look, I'm a fairly libertarian person. I don't believe in criminalizing things, but you have to teach people that there are consequences for your actions. I got in trouble when I was a kid, and part of the school routine was you got suspended, your parents were part of it, and you just didn't get away with it. And, they reinforced that over and over and over until you started to make good decisions. And if you didn't make those good decisions, ultimately, you were expelled. That's not really part of the equation anymore. You guys okay? Okay. That's not really the part of the equation anymore. They have passed laws that prevent the suspension or expulsion of students below a certain grade. So if you do, it doesn't matter what you can do, you can't suspend a first or second grader. And they're going to be back every year. And they're eventually going to try and pass a bill that says you cannot suspend or expel a student. And that's, you could tell the way, what they want, the general idea that we can't fail these kids. I love that. But you're putting the practical reality of education, you're just casting it to the wayside. And the result of that is parents are pulling their students out of public schools to whatever degree they can. A lot of parents are asking to have their students move to another school. Teachers are just leaving the industry. New teachers, that's the killer. And this is one of the reasons it's behind Kerwin. I have a family member of mine. She's a young girl, about 24, 25, 26. She went to school, got a degree in education. And then she started to intern in a local high school. And she was like, there's no way in hell I'm doing this with my life. She said the words that were used was like, the classroom is chaos. I would just have sexual innuendos thrown at me all day. So why would I want to live that? And she just took her degree, scrapped it, went back to college to be a nurse. So the idea behind Kerwin to remediate this is to, instead of challenging some of these notions and changing direction on some things, is we're going to just spend a lot more money, and we're going to have a lot more staff and a lot of different things. And I
think if we have enough microaggression awareness counselors, I think we can solve this problem.
Right. That's exact. And don't get me wrong, I think there are some parts of Kerwin, investment in trades. I think it was a mistake to get away from trades. I went to Eastern when I started high school in '94. It was called EVT. It was Eastern Vocational Technical. It was a vocational school. Everybody loved it. By the time I had graduated, they had actually removed the word vocational, and it was just Eastern Technical. And the principal at the time, and if you remember back in that time, they were being pushed to get kids into college because parents wanted their kids to go to college. So politicians were pushing the schools to get kids into college. And the principal of EVT said at the time, he said, trades are terminal, as in there's no future in trades. So what we have today in every state in the country, we have a lack of skilled tradespeople, and we have these people who can't find jobs, who are the working poor, working class people, and we call that the skills gap.
Well, I mean, and it seems like the average high school degree is just meant to be like a pre-liberal arts degree, where kind of like with most liberal arts bachelor's degrees, there really isn't all that much you can do with it. Whereas with a trade, you can start working the day you graduate high school. Absolutely. And frankly, a good plumber probably makes more money than I do right now.
Yeah, I actually have a lot of people in my district who went to EBT, who went on to go directly into a trade, and who make a ton of money. They make way more money than I do. And it's mechanics, it's HVAC people, it's electricians. I know them all. They still live here. They still work and live in Essex and own businesses here, and they make a killing. And they're a name brand. They're like part of the community. So, and it is something you can take right out of high school and go to be gainfully employed and well employed. So, I do think there are parts of the bill, parts of Kerwin that I agree with, but the big overwhelming push is this massive spending. So we knew COVID-19 was coming. I mean, I was talking to people in judiciary, and we're just kind of hanging there at the end of session. We don't know what's going on. And even the Democrats were going, man, this feels like a recession. This is terrible. I could see it coming. I don't want to pass tax increases. They did it anyway. Because Kerwin was a promise. It was a political promise to the teachers' unions and a lot of different people who, frankly, are the push of the Democratic Party. And there was a promise. They had to give it to them. I don't know how we're ever going to pay it. Because revenues are going to be way down this year. It's hard to say how long this economic slide is going to last.
Let's start here. What were our chances of paying it? What would we have had to have done to pay it if it were not for coronavirus? And then, I guess.
Right. So if not for coronavirus, they probably would have gained a little bit of revenue from the new tax increases, depending upon what the governor does. And for the next couple years, it's funded. So because a lot of the spending it's pushed down the road a little bit. Well, it's going to essentially be over $3 billion in new spending every year for the next 10 years. So if you're not meeting, if your state budget is approximately $46 billion, 81% of that is school spending, you now need to tack on another $3 billion right on top of that and figure out how to not only cover the distance between what you're already missing, but cover this additional more than $3 billion. $3 billion in a Maryland state budget is a lot of money. I don't know how they make that leap. I seriously don't know how they do it.
All right, so now there is coronavirus. Now what?
Uh, in regard to Kerwin or in general?
Kerwin, yeah.
They're going to have to reel it back somehow. Because we have a lot of things that are just state employee pensions. If you followed what they did with the state employees prescription drug benefit, that was horrible. That was horrible. They took these people's youths. A lot of these people worked their entire lives in state government. They were promised a retirement benefit, and you may think, I'm not going to agree or disagree with this, but you might think, well, that's a lavish benefit. But that was what they promised these people. You promised people a benefit. Now they're elderly. They're probably on a fixed income. They've planned their entire life to have this benefit, and you steal it from them. And it's not like a fluff fringe benefit. It's like something every person is going to need. You're going to need to have prescription coverage. A lot of these state promises, like state pensions is underfunded. These things are already, and this is a nationwide problem. Like the state pension is underfunded, and not only is the state budget not funded, the state pension fund's not underfunded. Now we have unemployment. How long is that? How long is that fund going to last? That's even before Kerwin. So the way that the only there's a fail safe in Kerwin. We pushed for it in the House. They wouldn't give it to us in the House. They put it on the bill in the Senate. So there is like an economic downfall toggle where it automatically applies if the economy can't handle the spending for Kerwin, it does not go into effect. So that's already in the bill. But I don't. The economic downturn that we're seeing right now is going to impact the state and the country for years. I don't see how they were going to pay for it before COVID. I really don't see how they're going to pay for it after COVID, because we're going to have 1,000 things pop up, and people are going to say, well, we need to do this, we need to do that, and I guarantee they're going to be back next session with a bunch of more spending bills. So I just don't see a frame of reference about how they're going to wiggle out of this one.
Well, I mean, even in Montgomery County, our county executive gave us his budget about a month ago, and he specifically said coronavirus is going to hurt our revenues from income tax, so we need to raise property taxes to make up for it. And just like there's, even with the county council, there's kind of suggesting that they're not going to do any tax increases. It's debatable exactly what they mean by that, but there's still no discussion of spending cuts. Yeah. It's just like they can't. They have a liberal agenda. They've gotten to level whatever on their liberal leftist agenda, and they just can't bring themselves to cut anything that will lower themselves down. Like, oh, we're now not quite as leftist as Connecticut. Oh, no.
Yeah. Here's how this works for them. They have learned to build organizations outside the legislature, and these organizations press them for things, and they have large lists of people that press the legislature to get their agenda done. So they really don't have a choice. They could not do it and then get beat to death in the election by all these liberal organizations. But that's why they're constantly delivering, and that's what conservatives and small government folks don't do. They don't build capital. They don't build a movement. So their feet are held to the fire. Like, what are they going to not pass Kerwin? And after years and years of making all these promises and building it up, they're going to not pass it? That's not going to happen. If there's an issue with the state budget, do you think anybody down there? I mean, they'll do what they can to fix it, but what they've showed time and time again is that they really don't have a concern for how taxes impact people. Here's an example. One of the most detrimental and damaging taxes we have in the state of Maryland is the taxation of retirement income. You're taxing people who they are in the least economically productive period in their lives. They're probably more dependent than they've been in their entire lives. They're probably less mobile than they've been in their entire lives. And they don't have the ability to just go out and do a little more hustle like, you or I could do if we needed to. They're on a fixed income, and they're on a fixed physical ability to increase that. And you're taxing that. Like it's a policy question. What exactly are you taxing when you're taxing a person's retirement income? Because it's not like a luxury tax. It's the bills that you have tax. And look, if we have a meeting with BG&E, and we have BGE do a town hall in our district, we hear the same thing over and over and over and over from people on fixed incomes. And it's that they cannot afford to pay their electricity bills. I mean, that's the concern we hear. I pushed a bill this session to repeal the taxation of retirement income. I forced a vote on the floor, but they just don't have a concern about how taxes impact people or push people from our state. And that's the reality of it. And it's sad. And these financial matters are going to come collect one day. And here's the thing. It impacts Republican, Democrat districts. It impacts black, white districts, liberal, conservative districts. It impacts everybody the same. And I actually had Democrats say to me, like, I'd like to support that bill if I could, because I hear the same thing in my district. Well, yeah, the taxes are impactful, and I just don't see that they have any kind of concern for changing it. But here's how they play this. They continually pass new spending, and new mandated spending. And after so many years, they say, man, we are way under budget. We don't have enough money to pay the bills that we need to pay. So what do? We need to raise taxes because we don't have enough money. Well, they raise taxes and they say, well, we've got all this new tax money. We got to spend it on something. So it's a vicious cycle. And if you look at, the how people move map, people are moving from states like Maryland. And it's bad enough when they're taking your income. It's painful when they're taking your retirement income. So that's kind of the state of the union on that.
Wow. Yeah. So any silver lining, any bright spots, anything that gives you hope?
Specific policy or for the future of politics in Maryland?
Either. I'll take what I can get.
So it's been a lot of doom and gloom from me this session because I wanted to point out what was happening in Annapolis. We actually did pass some good bills this session. The biggest, here's the irony of the moment. In January, the big concern was public safety because we have had and we still have this giant historic rate of gun violence and murder. Now the big issue is, what we hear about is public health, and what we're going to hear about 4 months from now is the economy. But we did actually pass some good public safety measures down in Annapolis this year. One bill I worked on was the, I'm trying to bring it all back to public safety now, was the Witness Protection Act. It wasn't my version of the bill that passed, but a very similar bill that passed from another delegate. And what it allowed was for the expanded admissibility of testimony for people who were victims of witness intimidation. So you have a right to face your accuser in a criminal trial. But what you can find if you walk through these criminal cases over and over and over, was that the witness would be identified. Somehow they would have some real extreme witness intimidation come after them, and then they would be pressured right out of the trial. And Baltimore is the world's capital for stop snitching. So, and this, there are many reasons why we have the level of violence we do. And one of them is chronic witness intimidation. So we passed a bill that actually expanded the ability of prosecutors to admit witness testimony. And I can see you kind of cringing as a lawyer there. but it allowed for expanded admission of testimony if you can prove that you're a victim of witness intimidation. I thought that was really positive because we have these cases where you can prove this, but we're finding that the admissibility of the evidence of the testimony of these witnesses was they still weren't allowed them to submit the testimony, and that there goes the whole case. If you have one witness, they can testify to a T how a person convicted of murder, and you press them out of a case, your case is over. So I don't know how you feel about that one as a lawyer, but
I'd have to read the fine print on that one. You know, are you proving that the defendant actually participated in this intimidation, or that anyone intimidated them?
I'd have to send you the bill. I think it might have been House Bill 40 if you want to take a peek.
I mean, if it's the first scenario, then that probably under some circumstances would be okay.
Yeah. So the witness intimidation thing is big for us. Public safety and crime is big in my district. But you know, is that is a huge issue. More people are going to die this year from homicide than the coronavirus. Well, I don't know the numbers. I probably shouldn't recite that. But we are still going to have a massive gun violence problem. But that has totally fallen to the wayside. Like this coronavirus situation so big that nobody's even talking about that anymore. And that's unfortunate because they're, mothers and fathers who are losing their children every day because of this, and people who are losing family members. So there were some good bills that passed. When the Trump administration passed the tax reform bill, that Maryland always linked the way that taxpayers filed, which actually caused people's tax rates to go up locally. The state actually unhinged that, so people are going to be able to file and get more of their money back. I felt that was a positive change, but again, that just kind of fell to the wayside. I think this round of tax increases is going to sting people. And ironically, you know, you have all these folks at home right now who are using streaming services. They're gonna, if the bill doesn't get vetoed, you're going to be paying more in taxes for that. So,
well, and people are going to start seeing that on their bill when they sign up for something. That's going to
right.
be, oh well, yeah, it's whatever, it's $12.95 for Netflix, and and here's my Maryland state streaming tax. I always thought it was like so stupid when that, in Britain you have to pay a tax per television that you own. It's just like a television tax. Right. And I always thought that was the dumbest thing. And most people are getting their TV by streaming now. So we finally have the same thing. You can't watch TV unless the government says so. Right.
You know, when they were looking for ways to find new tax revenues for Kerwin, I think it was Bill 1628. That was the big tax increase, and it listed the big change in that bill was the taxation of services, and it listed out all these different services which tax could be applied. Well, people came out of the woodwork for each and every industry, and they were knocking them out, and they were like, okay, well now we're not going to tax real estate. Now we're not going to tax this, and then the maritime industry came out, and okay, we're not going to tax marinas. They are really, here's the thing, they're trying to find revenue for Kerwin, but everybody's already taxed so bad. You could tell that they're really going to the fringes of tax policy to find new taxes to apply. I mean, there's just not much room unless you're really willing to make like an income tax increase or a sales tax increase. So.
All right, Robin. Well, I really appreciate you giving us all this time, and I'm going to let you get back to your family.
Thank you.
But as things develop, I'd be happy to have you on again.
Yeah, let's keep an eye on this COVID-19 situation. I pray for the families, the state, and the country that this goes away as quickly as possible. But I have a feeling this is going to be life as it is for weeks or months. So. Maybe a little bit down the road, we'll double back on that.
All right. Sounds like a plan. Colleen, Thank you very much, and I will see you all later.
All right, thanks, guys. Have a good one.